two, 1 2. Yes, yes, everybody. Hello, hello. Once again, I'm back at it, and it's Saturday, the 15th, middle of the month, February, 8:15 a.m. Central European Time. That makes it 2:15 Eastern Standard Time, USA. Yeah, I wanted to check out and make some comments, remarks about this trip that JD Vance and Pete Hegseth had here recently, or just the other day in the EU, right? And some of the events around that, right? I don't know how many of you actually watched the speech, but let's check it out. It is just ridiculous. First of all, I want to say I live in the EU, but I'm from the US, right? So, and I live in Denmark, actually, Copenhagen. And, so when I listen to this stuff, I'm American born and raised. My family's from, again, way, way, way back, right? In the history of the US, right? Hence the name, right? And, you know, when you live in the US, know the life for some, I grew up in the US, right? Born and raised, right? In DC. So I know the US well. And, but I had a chance to travel also in my 20s, around the US and outside of the US and closer. Yeah, yeah. So I actually, had a chance to see how other people do some things. And of course, you learn a lot, and most of what I learned kind of gave me more perspective on being American, also myself. So when I hear these comments and I hear these jokers talking, I got to give you my breakdown. So
Of the United
let's check it
States,
out.
Mr. J.D. Vance, who was here last year as senator, and we are very happy that he has come back to Munich, and we are very much looking forward to his speech. Please welcome Vice President J.D. Vance.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the gathered delegates.
This is the biggest stage that JD Vance has ever been on in his life. And notice how polite the people were. They clapped, right? You know, this is not a MAGA crowd, in other words.
And luminaries and media professionals, and thanks especially.
There won't be any jokes about lynchings or beating people up or talking down about transgenders. None of that stuff, right?
To the host of the Munich Security Conference for being able to put on
no DEI mentioned yet.
Such an incredible event. We're of course thrilled to be here. We're happy to be here, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And it's great to be back in Germany. As you
see, that's where I stop right there when he said our shared values. So let me be the first to tell you, the United States right now of America is the laughing stock of the world, and it is because of this person right here and his cohorts. And he's talking about shared values. um, there's almost nothing shared. There's almost nothing shared. What are the values? Is it education? And no, because education, higher learning is free in the EU, pretty much, right? And even many people get paid, even, right? Technical school, university, right? And not in all the countries, but in many, right? Now, healthcare, and we ain't the same. We don't share the same values, JD Vance. Europeans do not share the same values, see, because education is collective bargaining, you see, which people like JD Vance and his billionaire private friends that want to hoard everything, right? and then laugh at everybody while they do it. They don't share that healthcare, not the same values, right? Now, and there's a whole lot of other things. We could go down a long list of unshared values, you know. So, what does he mean when he says values? Well, we don't have to go far because this is a fascist. So, we know what he's going to be going for. It's not the investment in your family, right? It's not the investment in the nation that way. No, 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 no. He just wants to suck people right back into the place where we've already gone in history just 2 generations ago. Not even a fully two. You see what I mean? Maybe for some, right? Maybe for some three, right? But but yeah, so just keep that in mind. We don't share the same values. That's the problem with the US right now. It's not the same shared values as Canada. It's not the same shared values as the EU. 90 million Americans did not vote. We don't share that. In the EU, that's not the case. Way higher numbers of voter participation comes in the EU. 90 million people, that could be a whole EU country. And that's how many don't vote in the USA. And that's not even including the voter suppression. So we don't share that.
As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of those who...
That's a weak, look at that. You hear what he just said? He's projecting. He's he's worried his credentials don't don't really in reality put him on this table with the rest of these people. He is literally a DEI himself. That's probably why he's so offended about the idea. But this guy is totally handpicked by the puppet master, to say, to be exactly how he have to be to play the role. And we all know that because just a few years ago, he was calling Trump Hitler, you know? So,
have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even as, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we will certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but we gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security. And normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United
States. Check. Let me know if the audio sounds okay. Let me see. I got to do a little check here. This guy, look, he goes to fear and then jumps right into what he wants to say is propaganda.
And what I worry about is the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry...
Russia's an external actor. And he's, people have speculated that he has something on Trump, right? And
Worry about is the threat from within.
The threat from within. Now, this is so funny because let me just tip Americans off to something right here. Europeans leaders have been calling out the US government, but this time it's been very, very special because what they have actually been doing now is refining that message. And they've been saying the Republican Party. They haven't been blaming all Americans. They're talking about the Republican Party, its behavior, this group, MAGA with Trump, what they've been doing nationally, as far as not being very democratic, right? Yes, they've been criticizing the US for that, right? Not upholding democracy, right? And then now it's this. You see, so they're ready to criticize and not generalize. It's the same thing in Canada. They're calling out MAGA. They're calling out this fringe type of politic, cheap votes, lying, manipulation. But they're also calling out one other thing, that is the disinformation. And the EU caught on to the disinformation. Maybe they're a little bit more insulated in one sense, and that is they're a lot more unified. Americans are more divided. So the disinformation just came right into it and they played on it, you know. And the official record is that Russia and China, they played a heavy role in disinformation campaigns online, right? But obviously, when you listen more, you will hear him saying Putin talking points.
The retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently.
What are the values he's talking about?
And sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether
Donald Trump has said openly that he didn't want to have another election, right? He said these may not even be jokes. He's talked about saying he's going to be a dictator on day one. So who is this guy to even talk about that at all? Not only that, but the person who's on TV every day is Elon Musk making decisions, not JD Vance. It should really be Elon Musk here, but he's not here because the EU doesn't want him because of his bad business practices in the past, and also attempting things like this to buy elections, interfere in elections. So the EU, they caught on, and also they learned something else by watching the US politic fall for that, the people fall for that type of stuff. When they watched it, they learned one other lesson, and that is how effective it could be. You see? So JD Vance, he is just a complete, utter hypocrite. But we'll get to that.
We're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values. We must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces. Do more than talk about.
I'm sorry, I have to comment here. I'm sorry, this is ridiculous.
We're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values. We must live them.
Who the hell is he to say we must live them when 30% of the people 18 and older in the US don't even vote? That's 80 million people. That's bigger than any European country except Germany, maybe. And Germany's close to just 80 million, something around there, right? So, either France or Germany, right? Now, but who is he to say that? Voter suppression. Who is he to say that? And let me tell you, the Europeans are looking at him right now, and you better believe he's talking to Americans. He's not talking to the Europeans right here. This message, all of the stuff that he's saying, he knows they're not going for it. This message JD Vance is saying here is really meant for Americans because he wants you all to buy this bullshit. Europeans hold much fairer elections than Americans do, than the US does. Not Americans, but the United States, the US. They do. And democratic values, isn't democratic values education? Isn't democratic values human rights? Isn't it? Right? Isn't it healthcare? Isn't that also democratic value? You see, what about fair housing? Isn't that a democratic value? You see how manipulative, it's not even manipulative, it's grotesque, him even using that language.
Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections.
Check.
Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent.
Liberty. You mean liberal. Because that's it right there, you know?
To build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners.
They're sitting here laughing at this guy. They're trying to figure out, who does this guy think he's fooling? And I'm telling you, Americans, he is talking to you. Nobody in Europe is buying this mess. Nobody in the world is buying this mess. This guy is the vice president for Trump, a pathological liar. And their whole message is about lying. There's not one event that they, in one moment, that they won't use to spread a lie. And that's their tactic. And in the end, you can't count on anything that they say. That everybody knows. So this is pure propaganda, and no one's going to only plan for propaganda.
I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote,
look, listen, this doesn't make any sense. His own party ran on a platform of trying to root out a deep state in the United States of America. So that's a confession that your own country is in shambles. If you believe in that deep state stuff, but he's the one who claims it. Trump's the one who claims it. Elon Musk is the one who claims it. He claims there's fraud everywhere. So why is he over in the EU lecturing them? Look at this tone. This is such a phony tone. This is something like this guy has some sort of something wrong with him, like to just be able to openly lie like this. Yeah.
Combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action.
I mean, does he look like he really believes this, y'all? Tell me what you think.
I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or.
You see, so what he's doing is he's trying to incite the fascist in Europe. That's what his little speech is picking at, right? Instead of trying to not incite a riot, right? Which Sweden's laws try to, and they have the debate all the time. They have the same debate in Denmark. What's legal, what's not legal, where's the red line? You know, how is it defined? And it's defined not in loose terms like he's speaking. You know, there's a lot of details to it, right? But yeah.
Or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most
people are like, who the hell is he talking about? Like,
concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs.
Religious, this dude is all over the place.
A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before.
Why is this guy? This is a security meeting. This is the Munich Security Conference. And this dude is talking about abortion?
Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking.
I bet you he doesn't know these cases any more than than it being written together in a speech. I bet you he never really took any interest in any of these cases. It sounds like he just all of a sudden just picked it up quick. He knows everything about the EU now. He's heard all these stories. Yeah, man, this is such a cultural nightmare. You know, education, healthcare.
The government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution.
Women like to have their control over their bodies in the EU. So this is, again, he's talking to Americans here. He's preaching. The Europeans ain't going for this, y'all. I'm telling you.
Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October.
Keep in mind, the United States has never had a woman president. So when he's preaching about this kind of stuff, they've had many different EU parliament heads of state, right? It's nothing new in the EU. Right? Different kingdoms, queens, also outside of just the democracy part, even the kingdom aspect of it, you know. And this guy's coming over here lecturing. He's got some nerve. And look, he comes over here lecturing, and the guy he works for has been adjudicated sexual assault. He's been guilty of it. Trump, in a civil case, he's been found guilty of it. Trying to get at that lady and putting his hands all over her, or maybe even further sexual assault, right? In some sort of what is it, clothing store dressing room, right? But and also on an airplane, he's been accused several times. And then also the story from the woman who said when she was a kid, her Trump and Jeffrey Epstein physically violated her also. This guy works for that dude, and he's coming over here lecturing, talking about culture.
October, just a few months.
Like, he thinks people don't know that? Does he think that behavior is normal in the EU? Do you think you could be president in any EU territory if you were Donald Trump? If you had any of that? Do you think that? Americans don't go for this. And that's how people look at this right here. Europeans look at this like, what the heck? This is the weird. What is this guy saying? They probably have to listen to this twice to be like, is this guy serious?
Months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
What the hell? Free speech is in retreat? What is he talking about? The man he works for just threatened everyone in the room. And he's talking about free speech? Like JD Vance hasn't spent 2 cents thinking about what free speech is. First of all, free speech, right, should come with a vote. Don't ever forget that. And this guy comes from a country that has 80 million people that don't have a voice. Don't have a voice in the democracy, quote unquote democracy. 80 million people, the United States, yearly do not vote, or every presidential election. That's crazy. And he's over here talking about freedom of speech. You can't even get people to vote, man. Shut up.
And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth.
That's not
so true. I come here today not just...
No. That's not true. That's not true. And that was during COVID, when COVID happened. But yeah, because there was a lot of disinformation, and the disinformation affects the health, the ability to help people, right? And it's not just the disinformation, the things he didn't like. It's any incorrect information in an emergency, right? In a pandemic, and he's making light of that. That's their thing. I mean, tell me this. Are you happy with the price of eggs? That's how people are looking at him right now. Like, this guy can't even keep eggs in people's houses, He can't keep people in school. He can't keep people in a home. He can't keep people, anything. It's like, can't keep people voting, and he's lecturing them.
With an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the...
Did you hear him just say Biden? That is extraordinary. That is a weakness. Look, he had an opportunity to show these people who he is as a vice president, how knowledgeable he is as a vice president, how articulate he is as a vice president. And this guy focused on Biden. That means he doesn't feel strong himself. He had to bring something negative up to make himself look good, or something that he, would sell as negative to make himself look good. He need that kind of like crutch. That is really weird.
Trump administration today, not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence him, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite. And I hope that we can work together on that. And
why is he talking? He's talking about something national. What the hell is he talking about? And now he wants to work with Europeans on what? Freedom of speech? What the fuck? He's not even working with Europeans on security. what's wrong with this guy? Is he retarded? That's what I'm saying. Like, Americans, if you listen to this, understand this speech was for you. People in Europe are laughing at this speech.
Washington, there is a new sheriff in town. And under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
People don't know what the hell he's talking about.
Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad.
They're sitting there talking about, where does he get his information from? Who said this?
That this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective.
Look, again, y'all, he's speaking to Americans here. He's saying Europeans, but Europeans are actually in real time having issues with security with Russians. They know Russians better than this guy would ever tell you. And they know Russians. JD Vance probably knows Russians too, but he's probably just they probably got their hooks in him. You know what I'm saying? I mean, obviously, look at how he changed his story. I mean, look, this is the JD Vance. This is JD Vance. Look, hold on, 2 seconds. Check this out. This is what he used to think of Trump.
VP pick once called him a moral disaster and, quote, possibly America's Hitler. Here's a flashback to 2016 on how he felt about Trump then.
I don't know who I'm going to vote for. I'm definitely not going to vote for Trump because I think that he's projecting very complex problems onto simple villains.
Fast forward to 2024.
I don't hide from that. I was certainly skeptical of Donald Trump in 2016, but President Trump was a great president and he changed my mind. I think he changed the minds of a lot of Americans.
JD Vance, former President Trump's VP pick, once called him a moral disaster and, quote, possibly America's Hitler.
Right. So JD Vance, this is the guy that's talking, right? And he is not a seasoned politician, right? So don't get that into your mind. JD Vance really has little experience. For him to be on the world stage, it's a joke. And this is what people will look at him and think, because oddly enough, they do want to know your credentials. They do want to know what you studied, where you worked at. What's your, CV? Tell us about yourself. Who are you? What are your credentials? And JD Vance shows up to the party light, like most of Donald Trump's picks, and but now he's in front of people that actually do have credentials, right? Experience, really do the work, really do have come from societies with strong principles about education, healthcare, things like that. Society, you see, society. They're looking at him like they don't even understand why he could even think he could say something like this.
You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can
look. Why is he talking about this like this? He's like, we certainly do. But no, they don't. JD Vance doesn't look. He used this opportunity to lie. And this is all about the American people. He's trying to give a picture like he's selling something to Europeans. And because they sit there and listen, that necessarily means that they believe him or something. But the truth of the matter is that people find his behavior very, very strange, and Trump's behavior, because they see it as like, this is not the US. That's how they look at it. Like, this is not an American that they're looking at. They've never met an American like this. They've never even imagined that people could think like Trump or JD Vance, and they're very keen on what he's saying, like, especially when it comes to this disinformation, they're listening, but yeah.
To buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn
That he's trying to speak up for Elon Musk also, and he's projecting because this is he knows, everyone in Europe knows that Elon Musk bought the election. JD Vance, his seat was paid for by Elon Musk. Everybody knows that. That's what they think about this administration. That's really what they do. And again, 80 million people not voting, that's not democracy. That's not how they see democracy. So they already had Elon Musk and Russians playing around in elections. So they do take it real. And JD Vance is trying to make light of it. And he wouldn't even be the vice president if it wasn't for Elon.
on the world stage advertisements to
They banned Elon. They kicked Elon out of the EU. That's why he's pissed at the EU.
influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with.
Now, that's not really many claps. And he's very manipulative, because he's saying, but if it could be destroyed just by some disinformation, then it wasn't strong. Well, it being destroyed is not really the only bad thing that can happen. It can just be harmed. And there's a lot of room between destroyed and alive and harmed. That's a big area in the United States of America, even bigger than it is in the EU. There's less space because, some of the things we talked about that America doesn't share in values with the EU or Canada, and that's education, housing, right? These kind of things, and healthcare. You see, so there's room for people to be more prone for division, and in places like that, that's where it really takes over. And the U.S. got just caught up in a swarm of disinformation. It really swayed the election. But on top of that, no matter what, you got 80 million people that didn't vote at all. That is not an election. That is a failed election. That's a bad sign, right? And for him to be lecturing like he's good at something, he's not good at nothing, especially trying to tell somebody how to stop disinformation. I mean, this guy, his own president said he doesn't think it was Russia. You know what I'm saying? So everyone's looking at him like, wow, you're selling this point again about Russia? Like, you're really going to do that? That's
Now,
embarrassing.
the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe
Who's the many people he's talking about? It's like
that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still, which of course brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when when political leaders represent an important constituency,
he's talking about hate groups. He's talking about hate groups. Let's, just in case you don't know, a political party can't have any connections to a hate group. They can't use the symbols of it. They can't do any of that stuff. And in the US, it's a little different, freedom of speech, right? Americans, they take freedom of speech and this freedom of gun thing sometimes way too far, actually. Like, what does some of the good things that you have, though, is that you can be sued for calling people certain things in the US. That's good, you see. And but you see, JD Vance, he wants to roll that back himself in the US. And so he's given this phony speech about acting like he knows what's going on here in the EU regarding right-wing groups or hate groups, but you can see this is their plot. the entire time is to try to make chaos and then swim in. Try as long as there's chaos, they have room to move. If there's no chaos, everyone's looking at them like they're dipshits. So he's trying that here also. Like, don't don't think about what I said, right? Don't try to think about what I said, but about all these other issues. While you're hearing this, guess what I'm gonna do? All of a sudden I'm gonna talk about, freedom of speech and then say, these Nazis are good people, just like Trump said. See, I hope you get the point. This he's trying to get this thing like the Proud Boys thing to happen in the EU.
It is incumbent upon us to at least participate.
Who would benefit from that?
In dialogue with them. Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way, or even worse, win an election. Now, this
No, nobody's buying it, bro.
This is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we are defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces...
What you're witnessing here is the U.S. take a step backwards, capitulate on leadership, and miss the entire moment, right? And this is real. This is really weird because he's coming while his president is threatening giving tariffs on nations, right? Same tariffs that were just your allies, that have been your allies. So of course, none of them see this as normal. And when they listen to this, they just know that, okay, this government is in trouble. Something's very wrong in this government. So the U.S. really, really messed up. And this party, the Republican Party, is just really, really shady. But this guy is boring. So let's go over to Pete Hegseth and his shenanigans. Here we go.
Pete, We all wish you all success in your new job. Friends, we meet at a moment of great consequence. 2025 is the critical year for the war in Ukraine. Ukrainians continue to fight with huge courage, military and civilians alike. Their bravery, fused with our support, has proved a lethal combination. Putin believed he would win this war in 3 days, but now, nearly 3 years on, 850,000 Russians have been killed or wounded. But while Russia is weakened, it remains undeniably dangerous and is slowly taking ground. President Trump and President Zelensky have both spoken of their desire to achieve peace through strength. And it's the commitments here through this contact group that provide the strength to achieve that peace. And our job as defense ministers is to put into the hands of the Ukrainian war fighters what they need to fight and what they need to help force Putin to the negotiating table. At this crucial moment, we must step up further to strengthen Ukraine, to pressure Putin, to secure peace. And speaking as a European defense minister, we know our responsibilities. We are doing more of the heavy lifting, sharing more of the burden. Europe is stepping up with more defense spending and more support to Ukraine. For our part in the UK, we will spend £4.5 billion this year in military aid to support Ukraine more than ever before. And by the end of March, both directly and working with our partners Latvia and other allies, we will have delivered over 10,000 drones in the last year alone. And today I've announced an extra £150 million in new firepower, tanks, artillery, air-to-air missiles, and new contracts for repairs to crucial kit in Ukraine. Ukraine's security matters to global security. This war was never just about the fate of one nation. China is watching. Iran and North Korea are watching. All, like Putin, are looking for signs of weakness, for our determination to fade, for our unity to fracture. And when aggression goes unchecked on one continent, it emboldens regimes on other continents. When the border of one country is redrawn by force, it undermines the security of all nations. So let us recognize this danger. Let us confront it with conviction and unity and secure peace through strength together. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the new US Defense Secretary, Secretary Hegseth.
Well, good afternoon, friends. Thank you, Secretary Healy, for your leadership, both in hosting and now leading the UDCG.
Now, this guy's resume is thin. His experience as far as a person in that meeting is thin.
This is my first Ukraine Defense Contact Group, and I'm honored to join all of you today. And I appreciate the opportunity to share President Trump's approach to the war in Ukraine. We are at, as you said, Mr. Secretary, a critical moment. As the war approaches its third anniversary, our message is clear. The bloodshed must stop, and this war must end. President Trump has been clear with the American people and with many of your leaders that stopping the fighting and reaching an enduring peace is a top priority. He intends to end this war by diplomacy and bringing both Russia and Ukraine to the table. And the U.S. Department of Defense will help achieve this goal. We will only end this devastating war and establish a durable peace by coupling allied strength with a realistic assessment of the battlefield. We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine. To further enable effective diplomacy and drive down energy prices that fund the Russian war machine, President Trump is unleashing American energy production and encouraging other nations to do the same. Lower energy prices, coupled with more effective enforcement of energy sanctions, will help bring Russia to the table. Safeguarding European security must be an imperative for European members of NATO. As part of this, Europe must provide the overwhelming share of future lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine. Members of this contact group must meet the moment. This means donating more ammunition and equipment, leveraging comparative advantages, expanding your defense industrial base, and importantly, leveling with your citizens.
See, he's saying this, but the person that he's representing, Trump, has just hit all these people with sanctions. Not all of them, but, has come out threatening, and that's the thing about it. So the words aren't going to go far. And you could see he's trying to leverage some oil also, right? President Trump is going to unleash more oil, but that was already part of the Biden plan anyway, to increase deliveries of oil to the EU. So, and that's just at the price, right? The price is set by the companies, right? So, again, this is almost, they are listening and taking it serious, obviously, because they know their security is the priority. So they know they have to make plans, and that they can't rely on the U.S. for those plans. But it is interesting just hearing Hegseth. But again, he has no experience at all. So he also brings that to the table when people listen to him.
About the threat facing Europe. Part of this is speaking frankly with your people about how this threat can only be met by spending more on defense. 2% is not enough. President Trump has called for 5%, and I agree. Increasing your commitment to your own security is a down payment.
He's like, and I agree. Yeah, we know, because you're like a talking puppet. What, can you not agree? Do you have the freedom to not agree with President Trump? No, but you're a kiss ass, so why would you disagree?
President Trump has called for 5%, and I agree. Increasing your commitment to your own security is a down payment for the future, a down payment, as you said, Mr. Secretary, of peace through strength. We're also here today to directly and unambiguously express that stark strategic realities prevent the United States of America from being primarily focused on the security of Europe. The United States faces consequential threats to our homeland. We must and we are focusing on security of our.
By who? Who? What is he talking about? You know, this is what's interesting because if you notice, he hasn't said anything about the defense budget, right? But who is this threat to the US? Who is he talking about? That is out of nowhere. It's just totally
Our own borders.
It's totally made up. Canada is the threat. Mexico is the threat. Who's the threat?
We also
Remember Trump? What is he talking about? This is, oh my goodness.
must from being primarily focused on the security of Europe. The United States faces consequential threats to our homeland. We must and we are focusing on security of our own borders. We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese with the capability and intent to threaten our homeland and core national interests in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China.
How is that going to happen? Look, he's telling the very people that he works on security with that they have to do more and the US has to think more about itself. But, you know, they all agreed to raise it anyway. And so he's just like, you know, this idea about spend more, that was the conversation already a year ago. So it's a little strange, you know, but because they already agreed to spend more a year ago. So, you know, it's just it's kind of weird listening to this, you know, but you could see it's crafted to the American people, a lot of it. I would say so far, like 50%
In the
rhetoric,
Pacific, recognizing the reality
propaganda.
of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. Deterrence cannot fail.
You got to understand, he's not even a general. He's talking about security. And it's like there's literally people that have way more experience. They may not be in the military, but way more experience in security than him. He just hopped up from nowhere to be the Secretary of Defense. And he's speaking to people that have way more experience than him. And listen to his tone.
For all of our sakes. As the United States prioritizes its attention to these threats, European allies must lead from the front. Together, we can establish a division of labor that maximizes our comparative advantages in Europe and Pacific, respectively. In my first weeks as Secretary of Defense, under President Trump's leadership, we've seen promising signs that Europe sees this threat, understands what needs to be done, and is stepping up to the task. For example, Sweden recently announced its largest ever assistance package. We applaud them for committing $1.2 billion in ammunition and other needed material. Poland is spending 5% of GDP on defense already, which is a model for the continent. And 14 other countries are co-leading capability coalitions. These groups are doing great work to coordinate Europe's contributions of legal assistance across 8 key capability areas. These are first steps. More must still be done. We ask each of your countries to step up on fulfilling the commitments that you have made. And we challenge your countries and your citizens to double down and recommit yourselves not only to Ukraine's immediate security needs, but to Europe's
Look, is he telling Americans to do that? What is he, you know, this is funny. Right now, there's no, he's like asking European governments that are already organized and well operating. He's like preaching to them about what they need to do, right? And look at the US itself. It's in shambles. It's in utter shambles, you know? So his speech is not going to go far.
Long-term
It's not a speech you can count on. It's pure propaganda, this speech.
defense and deterrence goals. Our transatlantic alliance has endured for decades, and we fully expect that it will be sustained for generations to come. But this won't just happen. It will require our European allies to step into the arena and take ownership of conventional security on the continent. The United States remains committed to the NATO alliance and to the defense partnership with Europe. Full stop. But the United States will no longer tolerate an imbalanced relationship which encourages dependency. Rather, our relationship will prioritize empowering Europe to own responsibility for its own security. Honesty will be our policy going forward, but only in the spirit of solidarity. President Trump looks forward to working together.
That sounds so weird coming from him. Solidarity. Is that what they use at home in the US? Solidarity in their politics? Is that what that party is known for? Look, this guy has a nationalist tattoo on his chest while he's speaking too. But this was a really, really amateurish speech. I mean, or I don't know what you want to call it, but I didn't buy it.
To continuing this frank discussion amongst friends and to achieve peace through strength together. Thank you.
No questions, I'm afraid. Secretary Hegseth.
All right. He changed his words now. This is ridiculous, but he changed his meaning. Check this out.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start with the U.S. press. We're going to take 2 from the U.S. We'll take 2 from international, and then we'll go from there depending on the secretary. So
this is the day after.
Now hold on, John.
Sir,
I'm going to talk first.
Roger that.
It is great to be here at NATO with 31 allies, also with my wife, Jenny, who's been meeting with families of U.S. troops, both here in Germany, and we're heading to Poland right after this as well. That's what this is all about for me, for President Trump, and the Defense Department. I also want to express a special thanks to the Secretary General Ruta, for your boldness, for your friendship, for your leadership, and most especially for your urgency of the matter at hand, which is great to see from the leader of NATO. Look forward to working very closely with him and his team. Ukraine Council. In both, we discussed you can't shoot flags and you can't shoot strong speeches. There is no replacement for hard power. As much as we may not want to like the world we live in some cases, there's nothing like hard power. It should be obvious that increasing allied European defense spending is critical, as the President of the United States has said. Also critical is expanding our defense industrial base capacity on both sides of the Atlantic. Our dollars, our euros, our pounds must become real capabilities. The U.S. is fully committed under President Trump's leadership to pursue these objectives in the face of today's threats. Yesterday, I had a chance to attend the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. Today, participated in both the NATO Ministerial and the Ukraine Council. In both, we discussed Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. I had the chance to brief allies on President Trump's top priority: a diplomatic, peaceful end to this war as quickly as possible in a manner that creates enduring and durable peace. The American Defense Department fully supports the efforts of the Trump administration. And we look to allies to support this important work with leading on Ukraine security assistance now through increased contributions, and greater ownership of future security assistance.
That's a weird statement to make. He mentioned the Trump administration. That is very weird. Just
The American Defense Department
hear this one more
fully
time.
supports the efforts of the Trump administration.
You hear that? What does that have to do with it? Why is he saying that?
In a manner that creates enduring and durable peace. The American Defense Department fully supports the efforts of the Trump administration. And we look to allies to support this important work with leading on Ukraine security assistance now through increased contributions and greater ownership of future security assistance to Ukraine. To that end, I want to thank my UK counterpart, Defense Secretary John Healey, for hosting this Ukraine Defense Contact Group and for his leadership on support of Ukraine. President Trump gave me a clear mission: achieve peace through strength, as well as put America first, our people, our taxpayers, our borders, and our security. We are doing this by reviving the warrior ethos.
And what about the price of eggs?
Rebuilding our military and reestablishing deterrence. NATO should pursue these goals as well.
Andrea, this is your defense secretary.
NATO is a great alliance, the most successful defense alliance in history. But to endure for the future, our partners must do far more for Europe's defense. We must make NATO great again.
This is the core. You see why no one is going to take this serious? It's because he just used a political slogan for his election in a security meeting, security speech. That's his party slogan. Y'all, people are laughing at this. Whoever wrote this speech obviously has never been to a NATO meeting before and heard any speeches. That was written down. He's reading it.
It begins with defense spending, but must also include reviving the transatlantic defense industrial base, rapidly fielding emerging technologies, prioritizing readiness and lethality, and establishing real deterrence. Finally, I want to close with this. After World War II, first General and then President Eisenhower was one of NATO's strongest supporters. He believed in a strong relationship with Europe. However, by the end of Eisenhower's presidency, even he was concerned that Europe was not shouldering enough of its own defense, nearly making, in Eisenhower's words, quote, a sucker out of Uncle Sam. Well, like President Eisenhower, this administration believes in alliances, deeply believes in alliances. But make no mistake, President Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker.
Yo, just for the Americans listening, just so you know this, actually, the way he's describing this is absurd. He's obviously doing this because he's talking to his base in the U.S., and his base probably doesn't know the details, of what Europe spends on defense, each nation, and currently, but the only people that would understand this kind of talk is his own base, essentially. I don't even get his point. Why it's like he's repeating the same talking points, even though he's at two different meetings, really, and he's using a lot of this political rhetoric from his party, from their election, like he just did this, make NATO great again. You know, it's it doesn't make people. It doesn't give the impression that people should believe what you're saying. That's the problem.
Thank you, and we're glad to take some questions.
Thanks very much. Let's start with the U.S. traveling TV pool with Liz for them.
Thank you, Secretary Hegseth. You have focused on what Ukraine is giving up. What concessions will Putin be asked to make?
Well, that's
The big question, because like a dumbass, they went out there and said the whole thing in advance. They've been criticized for that. Now watch him walk that whole thing back.
I would start by saying the arguments that have been made that somehow coming to the table right now is making concessions to Vladimir Putin outright that we otherwise, or that the president of the United States shouldn't otherwise make. I just reject that at its face. There's a reason why negotiations are happening right now, just a few weeks after President Trump was sworn in as President of the United States. Vladimir Putin responds to strength. In 2014, he invaded Crimea, not during the presidency of Donald Trump. Over 4 years, there was no Russian aggression from 2016 to 2020.
But what I don't understand is, before they said they were bringing, they were going to stay out of these conflicts. Why does Trump even need to solve this problem? It's not like other European countries don't have nukes. Like, why does it, it seems like they want to be in the middle of this Ukraine situation. At the same time, they're saying, hey, but we want to back away from Europe. But why don't they just back away then? But it seems like they changed it, because when they were running, it didn't sound like, maybe they gave mixed messages, because Trump has been saying he's trying to stay out of all these foreign wars. I mean, isn't that what he was been saying? So
in 2022, Vladimir Putin took aggression on Ukraine. Once again, not while President Trump was president of the United States. So any suggestion that President Trump is doing anything other than negotiating from a position of strength is on its face ahistorical and false. So when you look at what he may have to give or take, what's in or what's out in those negotiations, we have the perfect deal maker at the table from a position of strength to deal with both Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. No one's going to get everything that they want. Understanding who committed the aggression in the first place. But
understanding who committed the aggression in the first place. What is there to understand? Everyone saw it. Putin lined up 150,000 military troops in a month's time. And when asked about it, he said, you all think you guys are crazy. And these troops are just here to protect the border. We would never invade. And then they invaded. The whole world saw that. And listen to this guy.
Challenge with both Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. No one's going to get everything that they want. Understanding who committed the aggression in the first place.
Understanding who committed the aggression in the first place. What the hell is he talking about?
But I
see you, Bev.
Challenge anyone else to think of a world leader at this moment who, with credibility and strength, could bring those two leaders to the table and forge a durable peace that ultimately serves the interests of Ukraine, stops the killing and the death, which Trump has been clear he wants to do, and hopefully ultimately is guaranteed.
But look, check this out. Why does he want to stop the killing and the death? I mean, did he sound like he want to stop the killing and the death in Palestine, between Palestine and Israel? That's kind of weird. I mean, because if you don't care, you don't care. If you want to get out of it, you want to get out of it. I don't get the difference there, but
by strength of Europeans who are there prepared to back it up.
Oops. Yeah, let me see here. Is he finished with this? Okay. I think he slipped on another question.
Why not invoke Article 5 then for the NATO peacekeeping forces that could potentially be deployed? How does that deter President Putin?
Well, I would say, I want to be clear about something as it pertains to NATO membership not being realistic outcome for negotiations. That's something that was stated as part of my remarks here, as part of the coordination with how we're executing these ongoing negotiations, which are led by President Trump. All of that said, these negotiations are led by President Trump. Everything is on the table in his conversations with Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. What he decides to allow or not allow is at the purview of the leader of the free world, of President Trump. So I'm not going to stand at this podium and declare what President Trump will do or won't do, what will be in or what will be out.
Right. And he just before said the exact opposite. This is ridiculous.
What can
And that's what I mean. Look, he's saying this in front of the whole world. So automatically, after this 1 week or this 2 days, right? They heard JD Vance, they heard Hegseth. Basically, they're persona non grata. These guys, that no one's going to take them seriously. They don't have experience. They're not seasoned at this at all. They just hopped into it. And that's how everyone is going to see their words. In fact, I don't think people will rely on their words to mean anything, personally.
concessions will be made or what concessions are not made. I can look as our team has of what's realistic, likely on an outcome. I think realism is an important part of the conversation that hasn't existed enough inside conversations amongst friends. But simply pointing out realism, like the borders won't be rolled back to what everybody would like them to be in 2014, is not a concession to Vladimir Putin.
It's not a concession? What do you mean? So why did you give it to him in the first place? Why are you saying it in the first place if it's not a concession? What is this?
Conversations amongst friends. But simply pointing out realism, like the borders won't be rolled back to what everybody would like them to be in 2014, real enough on an out.
Who said they won't be? When was that negotiated? You see, nobody is taking this guy. What they're getting from this is that they cannot trust anything that he says. Whatever he's pretending it's not like that. People will just have to wait to find out what's really going on. That's what people get out of this. They see is bullshit, and he's projecting too. He's admitting to things when he tries to double back and cover up. Then he admits to more things, fraudulent things. This he's a complete fraud.
I look at what can President Trump. So I'm not going to stand at this podium and declare what President Trump will do or won't do, what will be in or what will be out, what concessions will be made or what concessions are not made. I can look as our team has of what's realistic, likely on an outcome. I think realism is an important part of the conversation that hasn't existed enough inside conversations amongst friends. But simply pointing out realism, like the borders won't be rolled back to what everybody would like them to be in 2014, is not a concession to Vladimir Putin.
Oh, yes, it is.
It's a recognition of hard power realities on the ground after a lot of investment and sacrifice, first by the Ukrainians and then by allies, and then a realization that a negotiated peace is going to be some sort of demarcation that neither side wants. But it's not my job as the Secretary of Defense to.
No, that's going to make Russia become an antagonizer of Ukraine, and they're just going to plan and build up and antagonize them the entire time. They're going to cut them off at the Odessa port. You see what I mean? They're going to try to constrict their trade. That's what Russia's going to do, and that was the whole point of invading this time, to get more land so they could do that. And now he's trying to secure that aggression for Russia.
Define the parameters of.
And then, first of all, why would he even say that in advance of a negotiation? That is a concession. That's the definition of a concession.
The President of the United States, as he leads some of the most complex and consequential negotiations in the world.
Sticking with the U.S.
That wasn't complex.
press,
That was just being a fool.
let's go with Axios's Zach Basu, right in the far right.
Yeah, drink
Thank
that
you,
water.
Secretary. Given the position you've now staked out, what leverage exactly is Ukraine being left with, especially if the U.S. also plans to wind down its military aid? And then quickly, if a NATO ally is attacked by Russia or any country, will the U.S. unequivocally uphold its obligations under Article 5, regardless of that country's?
Well, we've said we're committed to the alliance, and that's part of the alliance, right? You point out Article 5, you point out Article 3. It's just a cheap, I'm not saying it's cheap coming from you, but it's just a cheap political point to say, oh, we've left all the negotiating cards off the table by recognizing some realities that exist on the ground. President, by recognizing left all the
How could he jump to that conclusion? It's just a reporter asking a question. This is crazy. Listen to this.
Article 3.
You said we're unequivocally if a NATO ally is attacked by Russia or any country, will the U.S. unequivocally uphold its obligations under Article 5, regardless of that country's?
Well, we've said we're committed to the alliance, and that's part of the alliance, right? You point out Article 5, you point out Article 3. It's just a cheap, I'm not saying it's cheap coming from you, but it's just a cheap political point to say, oh, we've left all the negotiating cards off the table by recognizing some realities that exist on the ground. President Zelensky understands the realities on the ground. President Putin understands the realities on the ground. And President Trump, as a deal maker, as a negotiator, understands those dynamics as well.
But I don't think the American people understand the dynamics. And, obviously American people have their own problems right now too. That's for sure, because it's almost like the same people that's been walking around fucking over the U.S. that just came to Europe to try to fuck around with some people too by having these meetings, and speeches, just making the whole vibe weird. You know what I'm saying? People can't wait for for both of these guys to just leave.
By no means is anything that I state here, even though we lead the most powerful military in the world, hemming in the commander-in-chief in his negotiations to ultimately decide where it goes or does not go. Well, he's got all the cards he would like. And the interesting part is oftentimes while the conventional status quo mindset or the legacy media wants to play checkers, the same checkers game we've been playing for decades, President Trump.
You hear this? This guy's at a NATO meeting and he's talking, you know who he's talking about? Legacy media. He's talking about what's being said on CNN and MSNBC. This is pathetic. This is pathetic.
Time and time.
This is pure, utter weakness. This is bizarre. This is bizarre. This guy has nothing in his head except projection, defense. He's so defensive. Look at this.
Again, finds a way to play chess. Legacy media. He's got all the cards he would like. And the interesting part is oftentimes while the conventional status quo mindset or the legacy media wants to play checkers, the same checkers game we've been playing for decades, President Trump, time and time again, finds a way to play chess. As a deal maker, as a businessman who
he's selling the president like you sell a cheap car.
Understands how to create realities and opportunities where they otherwise may not exist. Take, for example, the conversations that our Treasury Secretary had in Kiev recently with President Zelensky, which will continue in Munich with our Vice President and Secretary of State.
Like he did with the price of eggs.
Around investments and resources inside Ukraine. I don't want to get ahead of any decision or announcement that could be made there. It could be any number of parameters.
Right. Actually, to be honest with you, he doesn't have permission for Trump to say shit anyway. He's supposed to only copy Trump, but he's too scared to speak on things that Trump hasn't already, spoken to him about, So if you ask him something outside of the purview of Trump's own brain, it will surprise him. And here's his answer. Look.
Get ahead of around investments and resources inside Ukraine. I don't want to get ahead of any decision or announcement that could be made there. It could be any number of parameters. But President Trump, as a deal maker and a businessman, recognizes that an investment relationship with Ukraine, ultimately in the long term for the United States, is a lot more tangible than any.
This is idiotic. So on one hand, they want money from Ukraine, right? And they're mentioning this money at the same time he's mentioning negotiating with Putin. But he's not connecting it to the negotiations, although it's obvious he's trying to negotiate it at the same time. So he's not there to negotiate the peace. He's actually telling you that there's a complete, utter conflicts of interest. They can't lead anything. This man, he cannot be, he will, trust me when I say this, Trump and Hegseth, they will not be the leaders on what happens to Ukraine. Trust me, because this is just utter strangeness, just strange to even hear a person. Uh, this, oh my God. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't expect it to be this bad, really.
Promises or shared values we might have, even though we have them. There is something to relationships and deals in real ways, whether militarily or economically or diplomatically, that he sees that are possibilities that could forge together a lot of opportunities to show that solidarity that Vladimir Putin will clearly recognize. That's one of any number of other opportunities.
Facts, Andrea, exactly. Ahead of the election in Germany, yeah. And these kind of people, they create more problems than they solve. It doesn't matter where they are. But thanks for pointing that out, because that's what he's trying to do, in some kind of way. But it's a pathetic politic, because it never works out business wise. It only hurts business, but
that this president will leverage in these high stakes negotiations. So I just reject on its face the premise that somehow President Trump isn't dealing with a full set of cards when he's the one.
Did you hear this? What secretary would have to sit at a NATO meeting and defend their own boss from people saying he looks like a complete idiot? Listen to him do this. Listen. Why is this guy here?
Of other opportunities that this president will leverage in these high stakes negotiations. So I just reject on its face the premise that somehow President Trump isn't dealing with a full set of cards when he's the one that can determine ultimately what cards he holds.
Look at him. He thinks he's smart. Oh my God. I can't believe I'm hearing this shit at all, yo. This is just, Pete looks like a complete, utter asshole. And even worse, he sounds like one.
Great. Now shifting to the international press, we'll take the French wire service Agence France Presse with Max Delaney.
What a retard. This guy is just a retard. I can't imagine it would be that bad. And no one would be able to, right? I mean, you could think in advance. You could say, you know what? Trump is dumb as F, And so anybody he's hiring has got to be dumb as F too. I mean, he's almost purposely looked for that this time around. Like, he doesn't trust nobody. So he wants people that will totally morally, ethically capitulate and are too dumb to really, be able to master anything or have any control, right? So these are very, very weak people he goes after, but I couldn't imagine it would be this bad. I'm so sorry, actually. I feel so sorry for my kids, Oh, was it on?
You've spoken about trying. Thank you very much, Secretary of Defense. You've spoken about trying to force both Putin and Zelensky to the table. Can you give a guarantee that no deal will be forced on Ukraine that they do not want to accept, and also that you will include Europe in the negotiations about an issue that concerns European security? And can you tell us whether the US will continue to supply arms to Ukraine during any negotiations?
Well, to the first part of your question, that's not ultimately my decision.
I knew he was going to say that. You see that? He can't think, and they haven't talked. See, this is even worse. What he's saying is that it's not his decision. He's going to probably follow up and say he doesn't know anything about that yet. I haven't. But look, they came to the meeting and they haven't already discussed that. How are you going to have a negotiation when you haven't discussed that matter? That makes no sense at all. So again, and I don't know if he realizes that this is even worse. He doesn't realize it. He's not that smart. He doesn't realize the answers he's giving are very, very telling. He's giving more information than he needs to be given, for real.
President will lead.
In other words, he's talking shit right now.
Continue to supply arms to Ukraine during any negotiations?
Well, to the first part of your question, that's not ultimately my decision. President will lead these negotiations alongside our Secretary of State, our National Security Advisor, and numerous other officials that will be involved. And ultimately, we've played our role in talking to our NATO allies about what that would look like. President Trump, I want to point out, I've got the truths right here that he posted, called both, in case we missed it, Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky.
He just pulled up a piece of paper with a printed out tweet from that thing that Elon Musk owns, and he pulled that up at a NATO meeting as evidence of something Trump believes. What's going on here? This is just retarded. Like, can you believe that? Look
about what that would look like. President Trump.
This is embarrassing.
Trump, I want to point out, I've got the truths right here that he posted, called both, in case we missed it, Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky.
That's Trump's Truth Social tweet. He's holding that up as evidence.
I want to point out, I've got the truths right here that he posted, called both, in case we missed it, Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky. Called them both. Any negotiation that's had will be.
The US will continue to supply arms to Ukraine.
This guy is admitting that he has never talked to Trump one-on-one about this. That's what he's admitting, because if he did, he wouldn't have to go and hold up a truth tweet as evidence. This is bizarre.
During any negotiations.
Well, to the first part of your question, that's not ultimately my decision. President will lead these negotiations alongside our Secretary of State, our National Security Advisor, and numerous other officials that will be involved. And ultimately, we've played our role in talking to our NATO allies about what that would look like. President Trump, I want to point out, I've got the truths right here that he posted, called both, in case we missed it, Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky. Called them both. Any negotiation that's had will be had with both. I also am very encouraged by what the Secretary General has said here. Clearly attuned to the realities of the moment, the need for peace, and that the NATO alliance and European members will play a role in that. Ultimately, President Trump speaking to those two countries is central to the deal being made, but it affects a lot of people, of course. So I'm not going to be involved in those intimate diplomatic negotiations. That's for the pros atop the Trump administration who do diplomacy and negotiations. Ultimately, as security assistance, we have continued to provide what has been allocated, I think it would be fair to say that things like future funding, either less or more, could be on the table.
This guy is totally unprepared. Notice how his words, he didn't mention any data, nothing specific. He's like, we're already doing this, but explain, what is it we're already doing? How much do you know about what we're already doing?
Ultimately, as security assistance, we have continued to provide what has been allocated.
We have continued to provide what has been allocated, but what is it? And how much of it is it? He just goes right past that. But this is his selling point, to do that, to show what American power is. And this guy is totally, he can't do it. Look, I'm just saying, it's my criticism. I'm gonna let this play and then I'm out. But I'm having a hard time. Hey, everybody, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you. I'm praying. Because, you know, yeah.
I think it would be fair to say that things like future funding, either less.
Nobody can take this guy's word. No one will take this man's word to mean anything. They know that this is about authoritarianism, which is why he cannot really speak on details, and everything is up to Trump. So therefore, no one's going to take his word to mean anything. He has taken himself out of the secretary role by himself, actually.
Or more.
It's a very defeating way of doing things.
Could be on the table in negotiations as well. Whatever the president determines is the most robust carrot or,
in other words, he don't know shit,
or stick on either side to induce a durable peace, understanding obviously the motivations that Vladimir Putin has had on Ukraine for quite some time. Thank you.
We'll have a second international press outlet. We'll go with the German paper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung with Dr. Thomas Kuschka.
Thanks a lot, Thomas Kuschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Good afternoon. Mr. Secretary, 2 questions, please. The first one regarding the new defense investment pledge. When you and President Trump speak about raising it to 5%, do you mean European allies only?
This is embarrassing,
do you mean the US as well, which is currently at 3.4%, according to NATO statistics? And if the latter is true,
look, do you hear how a person asked a real question? He threw some data in there, some exact numbers, and look at Pete's face. He had to take a note, like, oh my God, what the hell?
Do you mean the US as well, which is currently at 3.4%, according to NATO statistics? And if the latter is true, when do you think the US could possibly reach the goal of spending 5% on defense? That's number one. Number two, you've said
that's up to President Trump
yesterday that Europeans need to take ownership of their own conventional security. So should Europeans expect that ultimately the US would withdraw the bulk of their forces from Europe and just leave in place what is necessary for nuclear deterrence? I know there's a revision going on. I don't expect you to name any numbers, but maybe give us an outlook of what we should expect. Thank you.
Thank you. I think nobody can or should contest the extent of America's willingness to invest in national security. We have a budget of $850 billion spent on defense. I'm in the business of ensuring that every dollar of that is used wisely, which is why we're pushing a Pentagon audit and making sure that we're cutting fat so that we've got more at the tip of the spear. 3.4% is a very robust investment, larger than most of our allies within NATO. Any defense minister or secretary of defense that tells you they wouldn't want more would be lying to you.
I'm gonna shut it down.
I understand.
I'll be back in a little bit.
Ultimately, we have our own budgetary considerations to be had, but I don't think an unwillingness of NATO allies to invest in their own defense spending can be dismissed away by trying to point at the $900 billion that America has invested around the globe.